So I want to welcome to everyone listening now and in the future. This is one of our pre and perinatal professional lectures. In the pre and perinatal online healing school, I have series of lectures from experts. And tonight I'm just thrilled to introduce to you one of my friends. This is Cliff Atkinson. And Cliff is another professional trained in pre and perinatal patterns like I am, pre and perinatal somatic therapies. He is an acclaimed writer and popular keynote speaker and an independent communication consultant to leading attorneys and Fortune 500 companies. He crafted the presentation that persuaded a jury to award a $253 million verdict to the plaintiff in the nation's first Vioxx trial in 2005. Which Fortune magazine called frighteningly powerful. Cliff's best-selling book, Beyond Bullet Points, published by Microsoft Press, was named Best Book of 2007 by the editors of Amazon and has been published in 4 editions and translated into a dozen languages, including Chinese, Korean, and Russian. So, like I said, a fellow traveler, a fellow pilgrim on the path. Please welcome, go ahead, Cliff.
Kate, thank you so much for having me and for this opportunity to meet with the community and to talk about story. And I just want to thank you, Kate, for providing this platform for all of us to share stories, to learn, to be able to connect with one another. And I was just, the other day, I was just on YouTube, and we both know Ray Castellino and his wonderful teachings. And I just clicked one of his videos that you'd put up, and it was just so profound for me just to be able to see him again, and then to be able to just slow down and really digest on a video format his teaching. And I learned so much just from watching that. It was about, I think, about an hour video, but it was just, I just want to send you my appreciation for all the work you do to create this platform for all of us to connect and learn. So thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. And I am live streaming from New York. So I am near Times Square. So I actually just took this video the other night near where I live. So I'm 2 blocks away from this. And what was really interesting the other night when I saw this was a production for a new NBC News show called Inspiring America. And they have a ton of equipment out here. They've got probably 50 people. They've got, all the famous people who are presenting. And they've set everything up with the cameras and the equipment and the sound system and 50 bodyguards. And they probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce this. And so one of the things that was really interesting to me is that after I came back home the next day, I just took a little video of my little apartment. So again, I'm 2 blocks away from Times Square where all that was happening, and that's my living room and my kitchen. But I just wanted to share that this is my little setup in my hallway. I've got a little nook here, and I've got a little light and a camera and an internet connection. And one of the interesting things I just wanted to share about that is that in that show that you saw, that NBC show, they, like I said, we're probably spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, all that equipment, and they were reaching for that NBC show. I think that their market that they would try to reach, the audience, is probably about 3 million people. But what struck me is that, with a tiny little setup like the one I have, like the one you have with your webcam, that when you click, if you're on YouTube and you click live stream, you just click a button that your story can reach 2 billion people. Okay, like with whatever equipment you have set up, for so long it's been so expensive, like NBC is still doing, to have a crew, to have that sort of system set up to get stories across, visual stories. But today, just what used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, even a couple years ago, I work with lawyers who do these big presentations. And they're telling me as well that, maybe 5 years ago, what would cost $50,000 to put a professional video together now just costs a couple $1,000s. Like the cost is dropping dramatically. So for many of us, the tools that we already have, we can reach just by clicking a button going live into YouTube, we can reach 2 billion people. And so that's really the context of the framing by which I just wanted to start a conversation with you all today, to share some of my background. I would love to share with you a story that I've been working on myself, a personal story, and then to talk about how we can share our stories, especially if we're in the field of working on beginnings and these really early influences in our lives. Because, in my experience of working in it, this is just such important work. And what I would love to do is to be able to share some of lessons I've learned, some things that I'm working on, and then also to open up a conversation. I would look at what we're doing today as just kind of like opening the door and starting to have a conversation about how it is that we can share our stories with the world. And I do want to say that what you're already doing is already changing the world. And I've been around this field and worked with Ray Castellino and John Chitty and Mary Jackson, and I've done Ray's entire training and for 2 years, and it just strikes me that this work is just so important, and already by just being here and just by showing up, we're already changing the world. So I want to start with that caveat that we're already changing the world just by being who we are. But I also want to add that as we can use these tools that are at our fingertips, we can reach even bigger audiences and at least let our work be known to the world so that whoever might resonate with it can connect, and we can invite them to work with us, or we can help them to understand more of what we're doing. And so, I do want to say that. And I guess the other caveat or the other part of this is that, as I've also done a lot of these trainings, I found that, I'm kind of coming in, like we all come in from different angles. Some of us are professionals working hands-on with folks. Others are doing this for personal development, and others are, we all have these different perspectives. And so I do want to say that too, is that we in whatever form we want to share our stories, whatever professions, that we can continue to influence and help others to understand how deeply important this work is. So let me just share a little bit of my background and my work in storytelling and so on. So Kate mentioned that I've written this book. It's called Beyond Bullet Points, and this book was originally written to tell the story, give techniques and tools about how you can tell a story. So a little bit of the backstory to that story is that I first wrote this back in 2000. The first edition was 2005. And what I'm showing on the screen right now is actually my very first presentation, my PowerPoint presentation. When I first started to learn how to use this tool, I was in business school, and this was in the late 90s. And my professor at college, business school, said, I want you to create a presentation based on what you're seeing here. And then I opened up this new tool I had never used before called PowerPoint, and then created this. And it's full of bullet points and text on the screen like we normally tend to see when we're working in this tool in PowerPoint. And so after that, I went and worked for a couple of .coms in San Francisco, and then I ended up working in doing some freelance work where I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do when I grew up, and so I was just doing freelance work, doing presentation design for a company called Artisan. So they would just send me out to companies, and I would go work on their PowerPoint presentations. But I did a personal project where I figured out how to tell a personal story using that same tool, and I had this aha moment where I realized I could actually tell a story using PowerPoint, which was basically used as text at the time. And so I started to just, I didn't have any clients, and I just started to write these articles about how we can use this tool more effectively for visual storytelling. We can use pictures. It doesn't have to be all text on the screen. And so I just wrote these out of my own personal interest because I was really interested in the topic, but didn't have any clients. And so I would just put these articles out for free. And then one day I got a phone call. I was just sitting in my bedroom, little office. I had a small desk there, and this was, I think, about 2003, 2004. And I picked up the phone, and this guy, was calling on the other end, and he said, "Hey, is this Cliff?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, my name is David, and you might have heard of my company. It's called General Electric." And we just initiated this brand new story platform for the company where we decided to be clear and simple in our communications, and it's been working great everywhere except for our presentations, our PowerPoint in the boardroom. Can you help us to get better at telling our visual story at the board of General Electric? So that was my very first client. It was so cool because I again didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just wrote out of my heart, these ideas I had about creativity and about presenting stories and so on. And so then that was my first client, and then that became, I spoke at a conference about that, and then Microsoft heard me speak and asked if I would write a book called, which became Beyond Bullet Points, was about visual storytelling. So this was the first edition that came out in 2005. But right after it came out, then there was a lawyer in Houston who was working on a big case, and he read my book and was and called me and said, "Would you be willing to come and help me to create the visual story for my very first case?" It was for a Vioxx trial in 2005. And I'd never been in a courtroom, and so he asked me to come on down and to help him create his opening statement. So I worked with him to create the opening statement, and he delivered it, and there were a lot of national press that were covering the trial, and the New York Times and Fortune magazine wrote articles about the presentations and about how dramatically better his presentation was than the other side. And Fortune magazine called the experience frighteningly powerful, how the words and the images came together. So those very first slides, that first presentation, these were some of the slides that we created. We're telling the story about how the jurors could be like CSI detectives, and they could uncover sort through the evidence and figure out what killed Bob in this particular case. And so he ended up winning a huge verdict, $253 million, based on the slides. And he actually ended up using these slides for another big case that he won in 2018 for $4.6 billion. So this is the power of visual storytelling in a professional context like that. The way that these stories are presented and the strategy behind them really can make a big impact. And that's what I would like to share and explore with you all today, is how it is that we might start to use these tools to tell stories. And it's part of what I've been working on to create, I call it a visual storyteller school, where we can start to apply a lot of these techniques for lots of different professions. So like as you saw with that legal profession, after I worked with that lawyer, I ended up doing tons of cases with him, and I've been doing this for about 15 years, working with lawyers. But one of the things that I'd love to do and explore with you all is look at how many of these same elements, the same qualities, the same dimensions of that are embedded into these stories and these high-profile legal cases are actually a lot of the same principles that I've kind of looked at and explored and begin to see in this whole field of pre and perinatal psychology. So that I think that now that I've done a lot of study in the field, I think a lot of it is about telling story, and that's one of the things that was interesting to me, or one of the things that I kind of started to realize, working with Ray Castellino, was just that, when we're talking about story, we're often looking at things like sequencing, for example. So sequencing would be what it is that we say first in a story. And I find that one of the really interesting things is that, a lot of times when I work on these cases, that the sequence is out of order, so the folks that we're talking to in an audience, the sequence and how we tell the story is sometimes out of order. So that's how I'm helping them to kind of see what it is that they're talking about. So a lot of these same elements, like intention, the sequencing of ideas, the pacing, transitions, These and naming things, these are all baked into effective storytelling, I think. So one thing that if you wouldn't mind, I've got a personal story I'd love to share with you. It's about 7 minutes, and I've kind of been working on crafting a story that is relevant to the topic that we're talking about. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to just share this with you, and then we can talk and unpack the story. And also, I would love to hear from you all about some of the stories that you all are working on as well, so that we can start to explore how it is that you can share these stories and share them with an audience using YouTube, using video, using lots of tools that you're working on. So if you wouldn't mind humoring me, I would love to share the story with you. So let me just go over to my main screen here and share with you this story. So here I go. So it's April 14th, 2013. I'm in Ojai, California, a small town in a mountain valley, an hour and a half west of Los Angeles. I'm at a ranch in the foothills, in a small building that has a garage downstairs and a large room for meetings upstairs. I'm sitting on an overstuffed blue couch. The windows are open and the warm breeze blows across my face, and I can smell the sweet mountain air. I can hear the faint buzz of a small airplane flying overhead on its way to some nearby airport. A beige couch is at an angle next to mine, and a mysterious man is sitting there. His name is Ray. He's 68. He's from an Italian background. He has long black and gray curly hair that's pulled back into a ponytail. 7 other people are sitting on couches around the room, listening to me talk to Ray. Ray says, "Cliff, what's your intention today?" I tell him I feel something is missing in my life. I was 49 years old at the time. I had served in the military for 6 years. I'd written a book. I'd been featured on the front page of the business section of the LA Times. Yet somehow I felt disconnected from it all, like there was something going on inside I could not name. So I had found Ray, somebody who I heard could help. He ran workshops like the one I was now attending here in Ojai. I looked at Ray and said, "Ray, my intention is to feel more alive, more here in my body." Ray pauses and just sits there, totally relaxed on the couch. Then he looks at each person in the room, then at me. He asks me a strange question. "Cliff, would you be willing to share your relevant history?" When he asked the question, it was like he cast a spell. I said, "Ray, it's interesting. The sound of that plane flying overhead reminds me of something. I notice my body start to move on its own. I feel confused and tears start to run down my face. I don't know what's happening. I close my eyes as I start to tell a story I had never told before. It's May 12th, 1941, the middle of World War II. I'm in Cologne, one of the biggest cities in Germany. The air raid sirens are wailing a terrible sound, and 1,000 Royal Air Force bombers are buzzing overhead in packs, their steel bellies full of 2.9 million pounds of deadly bombs. Their aim is to set this city on fire in retribution for what the Luftwaffe did to London when it destroyed 1 million homes and killed 20,000 people. Here in Cologne is an apartment building at 34 Klassen-Koppelmann Street. In the cellar of that building is a 24-year-old named Emilia, who would later become my grandmother. It's pitch black in the cellar, and the air is cold and thick and smells like dirt and the potatoes that are stored there. As the sound of the airplanes grows louder, Emilia holds her baby tighter. The baby's name is Hildegund. She would become my mother decades later. An airplane overhead releases a bomb and it whistles through the air and crashes through the roof of this apartment building and explodes. The building collapses around Emilia and her baby. The water pipes break and the basement begins to fill with water. By some miracle, Emilia and Hildegund are okay. The neighbors dig them out of the rubble and they find their way onto the street and make it to a nearby house to safety. Whew. Back in Ojai, I opened my eyes. I'd finished telling the story. I think it had been 2 hours since I started. I feel both exhausted and full of energy. Strangely, the room seems brighter and clearer. I look at Ray and at each person there, and their faces are beaming with pride as if I were a baby who had just been born. I wondered, where did that story come from that I just told? It happened decades before I was born. Yet, as I told it, I felt like I was channeling something directly from the past through my body, as if it were happening now. Later, I learned that big stories like this create big fields of energy. And because the energy is too big to handle at the time, the supreme intelligence of our psyche can split off the experience and store it away for safekeeping. For later, when we feel the safety and resources to feel and integrate it. As a baby, my mother didn't have the tools to work with that big energy, the terror, the shock, the confusion. So the experience was split off and buried. Somehow, when I was born 20 years later, this untold story was transmitted to me. It would become my inheritance that was buried deep inside of me. A big story, a big field of energy that I could not understand, that kept me from feeling grounded in my own body for 5 decades. Until that day, I thought that history was something written in a book. What I learned was that untold history can be written in our bodies. And if it is not told in a way that releases that energy, it can be passed across generations. And the inheritance continues until we choose to make the space and time to allow each of us to tell the type of story that frees us from these ghosts. Today in Ojai, I had succeeded in realizing my intention. In this moment, I felt more alive and in my own body than I ever felt in my entire life. Whew. So thank you for letting me share that story with you. And it's something that's kind of like a work in progress that I've been developing out. And I want to share with you, I guess, a little bit about that, how it is that shaping and telling a story can be both an inner work, a process that we're working on, as well as something that can help other people to begin to access information that we want to communicate. So let me go back. I'm going to go back to this little slide that I had set up here with these elements of story. So one of the things that struck me in working with Ray Castellino over the years is just, one of the very first, the images that stuck in my mind is that he talked about how it is when, after a newborn arrives and is welcomed, that one of the first sequences for a newborn is to find the breast. And so the baby comes out and then is starting to find its own way. And often as it's finding its way up, it's telling a story. Ray would say that it's actually sharing the story and will actually go into some physical movement as the baby is coming up and upward to latch in a blueprint experience or in the optimal experience. And it just so struck me that the very first thing that we're doing when we're born is to tell a story. And the story then has a sequence. Every story has a beginning, middle, and end. And it's such a deep imprint in our experience that's, I think, actually what we're here to do. We're actually here to tell stories from the very beginning. And as we start to unpack our own experiences around birth or even earlier, I'm again struck by how it is that the classical story sequence is there. So let's look at the classical story sequence. I'm gonna just skip over here to my little pen and paper here. But when we talk about story, you always talk about a story having a beginning, a middle, and an end, which means there's a sequence. So beginning, middle, and end. So even if you might look at that latching sequence, the beginning is being born, and then the middle is working our way up, and then the end would be to latch. So to have that very first experience. And I think that one of the cool things is that we can go back in time. Kate has been hosting this wonderful class on embryology with Bob Lundberg. And one of the things that happened for me is that it was kind of bringing me back into earlier and earlier stories. And one story that I realized, certainly there's the story of the egg, or really it's called an oocyte, leaving the fallopian tube, leaving and then entering, leaving the ovary, and then going into the fallopian tube, and eventually, if it's going to be fertilized, then implanting. But look at that. Look at the journey, the hero's journey. You begin. So the what's technically called an oocyte leaves the ovary and then begins. As it enters the fallopian tube, it's on a journey. It's on an adventure. What's going to happen? So when you look at the classic hero's journey, so the hero's journey is that somebody leaves home, and very often at the very beginning of the story, they might encounter some wise person that's going to help guide them along their way, and then they encounter some challenges. So they very often, in the challenge, they might then have a lesson learned, and then they, often there's like a peak and valley, and then some transformation happens before the end. So you've got the beginning, the middle, and the end, in the hero's journey. And the core thing that's happening in the story is transformation. And so even in the story I was just sharing with you, it's actually taken me, for me cognitively, I'm not wired because my own history and background, I'm having to kind of learn these elements of story and then apply them to my own story. So, one of the things that struck me, like when I first, so what I was describing in that personal story was my very first womb surround workshop with Ray Castellino in 2013. And I had no idea what really story and story structure was. And so some of the things that I've had to work on over the years are very simple things. For example, present moment, being in present time eyes, and being able to look around the room, know your present age. I'm 56, and I am in New York City, and I'm talking over Zoom with you all. And my intention is to share some insights or some of the things I've learned about story, and I hope to be able to share some of those with you and begin a conversation if you're interested in continuing to explore this, because it's something that I'm very passionate about. But I did find that, like, when I was first, if I did a first draft of that personal story, that I was missing key elements. I was missing ages of people who were involved. I was missing the details, the sounds, the senses. And so what you heard in those 6.5 minutes, it's taken me 8 years to tell that 6 minutes, because things that were missing for me, and I, even today or this evening when I was starting to prepare that, I was realizing that, oh, I forgot the address of that street, or like I'm wondering, what about, are there any smells involved? Even when I was describing the Ojai experience, I'm intentionally trying to think of the details, like the smells and the sensations and, the dialogue. So I know that for me, as I've even, worked on the script for that 6 or 7 minute story, it's taken a long time to be able to find the detail and the particularities of the story that help to bring it to life. And as I've taken classes on personal narrative or writing, what strikes me is that they're encouraging you to do the same thing, to find the felt sensation, to put yourself in the current moment, to really incorporate all the senses into the story that you're telling. And it's in those details that you really bring it to life for the folks you want to communicate with. So whatever the story is that you might want to tell, I do want to offer that some of the key things that you can offer to them. What one is I really think that with story, that personal story, whatever your personal story is, or if you've got anecdotes from folks that you've been working with, that as you can start to structure a story that brings your audience into the experience, that is the most powerful way of communicating, is to bring the story to life. Because when you bring it to life, then you're bringing the other folks with you. So, I think it's so important with something, the topic that we're dealing with about beginnings and the influence on beginnings on us individually, the people we work with, on our culture, that's such a big and important topic, and it can be really difficult for people to understand who are not familiar with it. So that would be like a big thing, I would say, is that, what can you say to people who are unfamiliar with pre and perinatal psychology to start out with? So I've run into that struggle myself when people say, well, what was that workshop you went to, or what are you doing? And then, if you were to say, well, it's about pre and perinatal psychology, I find myself, if I were to say that, then they're saying, well, what? I have no idea what that is. And you might say, well, it's about, influences that, things that happen really early, around birth, even before birth, influence you. And they're like, what? I never even heard of that. So that's what I find, those responses I see with audiences as I'm trying to communicate, even just going to a workshop, can be, how it is that we present it can be, a challenge. And I run into that every day when I work with these clients on really big legal cases, that they've got 6 million documents, really complex terminology. And one of the things that I'm helping them to do is really to simplify it and bring it to life. And there's nothing better that can help you to bring it to life than a story, and specifically an anecdote. So if you've got a client that you've worked with, if you've got your own personal story about how it is that this field and this profession has changed you, then that can really help. And let me just offer that one thing before, I would love to talk with you all today about some of the stories or topics that you are working on. And then we can talk about that and share about that, share that with the group. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, I've got one more point to make, but if you wouldn't mind in the chat box, if you could share, and then Kate can share this with the whole group. But if you could share a struggle that you face when it comes to telling a story, or communicating your message, or getting your points across, whether you're teaching or you're just communicating to clients what it is that they may be able to get out of working with you. Just share what's the main struggle or one big struggle that you face when you're aiming to tell a story. So yeah, please share that if you have something. If you're willing to share, please share that in the chat box, and then I will ask Kate if she could share that with us. But I did want to make one last point. I know for me, one of the struggles that I faced, and again, the little story I shared with you earlier, was even relating. I think an imprint for me, if you want to use that word, or a challenge for me has been to even talk about myself or make myself a character. So I know in a story. So I know in this story that I share with you, it took a lot of effort for me to say, oh, it was actually me who was showing up. I came to this workshop with a challenge. I wanted to feel more alive. Then this big story kind of emerged, and then by the end, I had a lesson, something I learned at the end. I had a transformation. And that's really another core principle, I think, with any story, is that you've got to structure it in a way that you've got a main character, whether it's, let's say, your client, and you're wanting to share what happened. Let's say that you're seeking clients, or you want to share with other folks the beautiful work that you do. There's the beginning point where somebody comes in with a challenge. So let's say you're working with babies, and you might share the story about how fictional, like a baby came, and a parent came to you because their baby was facing this problem, and then you brought them in, and then you worked with them in XYZ methods, and then by the end, you were able to leave them feeling better, or helping them to have achieved their intention. So that's a key thing. It's just like the main character is selecting the main character of the story, and then there's going to be some intervention, some transformation, so that by the end of the story, something has happened. And so at the simplest level, that's really the building block of the story, is that you've got to have it. So it's identifying who the main character is, what challenge they're facing at the beginning, and then in the journey, in the middle, how did they encounter that? What were the ups and downs? You might have tried this element, that worked, and then that didn't work. And then finally, something happened, something worked, and then they walked away with a change in their lives. So with that core structure, it's really all about transformation and the setting up of the story. And then when you've got that in place, then you can start to work with the various tools that are available to start to visualize the story, to bring it to life. So in a lot of the material, like in my book or some of the courses that I have, I'm teaching how you then take that underlying story structure. That's always the hardest part. It's the hardest part to outline the story structure, find the character, the transformation, the sequence. And then once you have that, then you can start to build it out with visuals, with the metaphor, with the other ways of using story. And even telling, you could tell just a verbal story, you could add on the images, you could have PowerPoint, you could use props, tools, all kinds of things you can do. So, but the core takeaway with that is just to, at the simplest level, to identify who the character is, the challenge they face at the beginning, what their transformation was by the end, and their takeaways as well. So Kate, do we have any folks who've shared anything in the chat box, or any questions so far?
Yes. Let's see. I have Matthew says, my biggest challenge is simply remembering stories or anecdotes to tell. My relationship with memory is complicated.
I can, I can totally relate. And so this is actually my little script here that I have been working on with that little story that I read. And I would encourage that is just to, you could write stories. The writing of the story, I think it's going to be really helpful. And I think like joining a writing group, maybe on Meetup, or if you've got other folks in your profession, that if you have some regular structure where you can meet with folks and share a little piece of your story and then get feedback and work on that for the next piece. I think that can all be really, really helpful. So I would say that would be a big thing. Is just like joining, a writing group and getting the sequence in place, and then starting with one story. Whatever story is the easiest to access for you, and then I would be working on having just like a series of stories. So once you've got like one story that you've developed out and you've worked that out, as you write these, you probably just need 3 or 4 core stories. So people who are, for example, professional speakers will often be working on what they call the signature story. So that's like the main story that they tell, and a lot of folks will spend a lot of time and resources to develop that out. And then once they have that, then you can develop smaller anecdotes. But I would just encourage, to start with a writing group or with a group of friends, meet on a regular basis, and start to build out. Start with one story, and then start to build out 3 or 4 or 5 stories, and those kind of become the core material that you can work with and apply with whatever you're working on. Anything else, Kate?
Yes, Katya says, sometimes I get so nervous that while I think I know what I would like to talk about, I cannot seem to make sense.
So that's where I think that and I run into that as well. So a lot of the things, even the story I read, like that has taken a lot of work and many years to write that, and I can totally relate to that. And I think what I might offer is in the simplest way. One of the tools I work with. So when like yesterday, I was just in Houston. Like, where was I? Dallas yesterday, working on a case. And again, so I work with these lawyers who have 6 million documents, and I'll sit down with them, and then I've got a little tool that's in my book, and I can send everybody a copy of this. It's just a Word document. But in it, I've got the first thing I say is, what are the 3 most important things you want your audience to remember? And so that has a really nice effect, because like for a lot of these folks who are working and are also finding it difficult to find the story, if you can just say, constrain it in some way and say, what are the top 3 things you'd love to get across? That can be a tool that can help. Another tool, I often work, when I do these workshops at working with lawyers, again, on these really difficult, complex cases, I will introduce the poem, a type of poem called a haiku. So if you're familiar with that, there's, it's something with 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. So they're working again on these complex cases, and it's hard for them to kind of figure out what the story is because they've been working with it for so long. And then I'll ask them, just take 2 minutes and write a haiku of your case with 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables. So, you would think that if they're lawyers and they're, all rational brain, or, maybe more oriented or left brain biased, where they're focused on the details and cutting things up and the letter of the law, I am always just so amazed when 2 minutes later they stand up and share their haiku, their poem they wrote of their case. I mean, it's the most poignant, heartbreaking. Most of these cases, these are plaintiffs' lawyers who are working often where people have been injured, and so then they might be suing a company or for the injury. And so in these poems, I mean, they're the most heart-wrenching, most powerful, most emotional stories in just 5, 7, and 5 syllables in these short poems. So that might be another idea, is just to, if you do have a story that you want to tell, or you're wanting to communicate a topic that might be difficult to put your hands around, try writing a poem and see if that might help to distill down the essence of what you want to get across.
What a good idea.
That's fun.
Okay, Cliff has asked me to read these out from the chat, but would anybody like to come up and actually tell? Because I can put you up on the
Ooh,
screen if you would
that's a
like.
wonderful idea. If anybody has a brief, a 1 minute, couple minute story that they could tell, we could also
Or
talk
just what the challenge is. Like
or the challenge.
there's
Okay.
quite a few people who've written challenges, and Katya says thank you. But the next one I'm on is Irene. Would you like to come up, Irene, and talk and tell your challenge? If you do, just open your microphone, then I'll find you.
I am
Irene.
I am not sure if that's a good idea, because I don't know if you listen to my mic, it has a sound that can be annoying.
Okay, well, I can read it out loud, but I'd love to hear your voice and see your face.
I can hear you.
Okay, if it's not too annoying, I can say
No.
that is the struggle that I found. I
Sure.
don't tell stories usually. I came here because I wanted to learn how to use this in the therapeutic realm.
Yep.
And just thinking about it, I found myself kind of stuck. Like there are so many options,
Yes.
and how do I use this in order to it to be healing? And I also found myself with a bit of fear about making things up. Like I don't have that much information. I'm thinking about prenatal and pre-prenatal. And I don't have that much information. I have some, and it's really important. But I'm thinking about I will go wild, and so that's it.
Well, so question for you though. So is it, so what would be your intention with telling the story? Is this to share with potential clients the work you do with the intention that they might, ask you to work with them? Or is this for existing folks you're working with and you would like to make a particular point to explain something?
Well, I didn't have an idea when I came to this workshop, but I was thinking more about healing my story because it's really stuck. So I'm working through it. I have done several things, and I was thinking about that. But as I hear you speaking, I can think about so many other options.
Yes. Well, that's terrific. And I would think that, I think that, I have a problem too focusing. So I could totally relate with that, with the feeling of having so many options. I can totally relate with that. And I think that one thing that I found helpful is just to, in the whole field of marketing, they have this concept these days called an avatar, and that might be helpful in terms of what they aim to do. So this might be a company that's trying to reach an audience. So what they do is they create a profile. They create they call it a persona, or they're basically creating a composite person that, and they, a lot of times it's based on, they do demographic studies and so on. But what they're aiming to do is say, well, this person named Maria is living in Brooklyn, and she is, she works in this kind of profession, and then she is seeking, help, or she's facing this challenge. And so what that does by making the audience really specific is just to help them to focus on the story they want to tell by shaping it to meet the needs of that audience. So that can be a wonderfully focusing technique. And I also apply, so in the work that I do, a big part of my work is working with these lawyers, big cases. But part of the focusing quality is that they need to communicate this to to 12 people sitting in the jury box. And they often will know the demographics of those folks. So this is just a cross section of ordinary citizens, many of whom may be, high school educated, maybe they don't have advanced degrees, and there's also a mix of different classes and cultures and ages. And so they're needing to take something complex and just make it really easy to understand and help them to make a decision about how they should, decide and come up with a verdict. So I think really getting to know the audience that you're talking to can help be a really powerful focusing tool to know what kind of story, what is it that would be helpful for them to hear? How is it that, that act in and of itself, imagining who you're talking to, can help to focus and select the right story that might be a fit for them. One last thought about that. I have worked a lot with big companies, and the companies often have something called a, they have a presentation, and it's called a capabilities presentation, where they just kind of list all the things that they do. And often what happens with those is they just kind of put everything out there, and it's not really focused on the needs of the person they're talking to. And so I'll often tell them, like, who is it, who is it you're talking to, and what is it that they need to know? And then that helps to really focus. Out of all the things you could say, you're now just selecting the top three things that particular person needs to know. So that's just another way of just looking at the same thing. It's just that, we all have lots of stuff, lots of information we'd love to communicate, but by focusing on the needs of the audience we're talking to, that can really help to find a focus for us.
Thank you, Irene. That was a really beautiful question and a wonderful answer. All right, our next person is Nancy Andrews. Nancy, would you like to come up and say your challenge about doing your story with Cliff?
Yeah, oh, okay, sure. Hi.
Hey, Nancy.
Yeah. Well, actually, you've answered a lot so far, but yeah, I get nervous too.
Yes.
And then I get I have a lot of trouble focusing and synthesizing my thoughts, to choose what to say and for it to make sense, because
yes.
It gets all confused. And then when it comes out, it doesn't always sound like what's in there and what I want to say. But what you've been saying is all helpful for that. So thank you.
Okay, great. Well, and here's like a little technical tool too. So I've got, that story I shared earlier, so I've got a little technical setup here where I actually had, I don't know if you can see it with the light on the phone. Nope. I don't think you can quite see it because of the lighting, but I was actually using in this little technical setup, I was kind of reading the story. It's like, these days there's an app that will act as a teleprompter. And so you can write out a script on your phone and then put the phone up, and then you can read that, and it actually serves as your notes, so that it looks like you're just saying it, from scratch, but you're actually reading it from a teleprompter. So that's a kind of a confidence builder. If you can kind of have the script that you've spent all the time working on, and then you just read it. This is actually voice activated. The actual app is voice activated. So once you have it in, you just read it, and then it scrolls down automatically while you're reading it. So that's a thought.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And how is it called, that app you said?
This one is called, there's a bunch of them out there. This one is called Prompt Smart Pro. And I can so Kate, can we send out an email or something, or like give people resources afterwards or something? I'm happy to.
Definitely.
Okay, so we'll send that out. But that's another way. And then another way too, as you might start developing out the story, one of the things that I'm using now is I've got PowerPoint behind me, and I teach a way to use this in a way that you're just using pictures on the screen, and the pictures serve as a prompt to help you tell the story. So even earlier, let's see if I go back to some of these slides that I have earlier. So when I had like just a logo up, or I just have pictures up like these, then I'm kind of using these as a prompt to tell my story. So the technology, once you're working on the story, the technology can help to serve as a prompt to tell your story as well. But I think too that even if you're telling a personal story, and maybe I just am thinking of like holding up like if you're telling a story about your family and you hold up just an object that this was the cup that my mother drank from every day for 35 years, and every time I pick it up I think about what it was like to hold this warm tea in my hand. So whatever it is, the tools like a prop or even the screen or the technology can help to accompany you and be like an additional help to keep you on track and to remind you of what to say. So those are a couple of ideas that hopefully might help.
Thank you so much. It's very
you're welcome.
helpful.
Oh, great.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so the next one is Sylvia Christine McGurk. Would you like to come up on the screen and share? Just open your microphone then. There you are.
Hi.
Hi there.
I've just realised while we've been talking about everything that probably at this very moment in time, my main challenge is how to explain all of this to my family and close friends, because I'm at a point where I'm trying to help my parents and my sisters, and I stopped work at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yep.
I used to live in Spain and I moved back to England just before the pandemic. So it's almost like it's this time where everything has stopped and I've had to concentrate on that. So I'm kind of like probably trying to figure out a way of helping everybody understand where they are, because how do you tell the story when it's very personal and it's also not that easy to explain?
Absolutely. Could totally relate to that. I think a lot for me as well was, my own journey of trying to tell these stories. There's a lot of shame imprints around a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of it feels like when I was, in my very beginning, that there was too much of people looking at me like too intently. And then there was there was this feeling, even like now, it's just like a shock response like this, like kind of arching back. And then also shame response. So just like I had to hide. And so with that, I can totally relate, because even often I will have shared a part of, a story, and then I just feel that imprint of shame kind of pulling me back.
Yeah.
And so I think that, one thing might be is to, as you might find your own safe pod of fellow travelers, that is a wonderful place to begin to explore and share stories, and maybe in a little bit of a structured format, like I had mentioned earlier, a writing group. But what if it was a story sharing group with 2 or 3 close friends who are on the same journey? That can help to build a muscle. I find is that taking the step of going into 2 billion people is a big step with really tender material.
Yeah.
And I think as we might start a process of in a little pod and creating the conditions for support, that then we can start to build it and build it and build it out to where we're so solid in it that I can go to 2 billion people because I've just developed those muscles. So I would look at it that way, that maybe it's like building that muscle, like you're just building that strength, and you need the safety and support at the very beginning in order to build that to be able to go out.
Okay, thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
The next one is Karen DeJonge. Did I say your name right, Karen?
And no, not quite, but that's not important. Yeah, I'm always afraid that I'm telling too much personal stories. Also during practicing, and I'm not sure if people are waiting for it, but I think it's fun to do. But I'm always trying to find the balance in it.
Yes. So my general sense, a wonderful, wonderful point, and it's that balance. Like, where is it that you're just talking about? When am I all just talking about myself, and when is it that you're finding that balance where you're helping people to understand your message? And I think that line is somewhere where if you can somehow take your personal story and then find the universal, the lesson that you learned. So that's one thing I was trying to do with that personal story I'm still working on. One of the things I was trying to do is say that, all these things happened to me, but at the end I learned that these stories can be written in my body, and that, it's important to let them out and share those with a broader audience. And so to the degree that you might be able to take your story and then say, well, what was, and this can take some work and some time to do this, but what was it that's really kind of the universal lesson or the principle that came out of this? Like when I went to that workshop, or when I went through that experience, what did I learn that's something that other people could also learn as well? And so, because there are, like you bring up a wonderful point, there are so many different kinds of stories, and there's anecdotes, and there's I went bike riding today, and this is what I saw. But I think a lot of what we're talking about is like crafting a particular type of story that has some universal message, and then when we can find that's what resonates with the folks that we're wanting to reach.
Yeah. Sometimes I also use it to explain
Yes.
I say or I see in the baby's reactions, or for instance, like they're crying a lot, and then I explain what I have done in that situation, or what I think it is, and then I tell personal stories. But afterwards, I think, oh my goodness, was it really what they wanted to hear, or is it because I wanted to explain, or is it because I wanted to tell about it?
Yes. Well, that's a wonderful point too, and I think I've had challenges with this as well, just in because sometimes it just I'm just being brave just to like share this piece of vulnerability,
Yeah.
and then afterwards it's like I've spoken before on a stage, and then just like run off because I don't want to I feel shame, like did that really land? And so I think that I've learned too that we can go ask the person afterwards, or even the next day. Maybe it's an email or a text or a phone call, and said, I shared this thing with you yesterday, and I'm feeling kind of like I'm not sure whether or not it landed. Like, what did you guys think? Or did it land for you? Or do you have any suggestions on what worked and what I could do better next time? So it might be that next step is just to reach out and then to ask for feedback. Because often, I might be thinking, that was awful, and I'm feeling vulnerable and I just want to go hide. But then when I actually talk with somebody, they say, oh my God, that was the most amazing thing ever. I loved it. So that's revealing that it was really just my own imprint. It was just my own filter that was saying I just did a terrible job when they all thought it was wonderful. So getting the real feedback, from other folks, I think can be really useful.
Hey, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we're done with our people who shared in the chat. So
Okay. Awesome. Well, yeah, so I think as we're wrapping up for today, I just want to those are just such wonderful questions, and I think it's part of our journey in this field, is how it is that we can find our stories, find the universal messages, find these ways to communicate with people that really resonate with them. And I think as we find those in our small groups, in larger groups, in the beautiful community that Kate has created here, I think I think, as we might begin to tell these stories and share them with one another, we're really building a potency, in the terms of the profession that we're involved with. Is that as we create and build and share these stories, it creates this potency that helps to then offer this as a gift to the world around us. And like I mentioned at the start, it's clear that just by showing up and being who we are, as we are, we're already changing the world. But that with the craft and the art of storytelling, structure, feedback, learning how to do this and take this to the next level, then we can offer our gifts to an even, a bigger world that I'm convinced is just thirsty for this knowledge, that is hungry for this nutrient, for this wisdom that we have to share. So I hope, Kate, that this is the beginning of exploring this topic, because I think it is something that together, as we develop our muscles of storytelling and our skill and this potency, that we can really, continue to build and tell these stories and change the world together. So, Kate, thank you so much for having me today. It was really a pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking with you all, and I hope that we can do this again sometime.
Yes, you've really given us some nice little tips and tools, Cliff. I really appreciate it. And you have a program, right, where we can come and learn more?
Yeah, if you just go to my website, cliffatkinson.com, then there's you can just sign up for the newsletter, and then I'll send updates on when classes and other events are available.
Visual storytelling. That sounds good.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I wanted just to say, like, I like telling my story of how I got involved in pre and perinatal work. There was a client that remembered her birth.
Yes.
And I tell that story. It's a good one, and I call it the client zero story.
Yes, I love that.
And also in the online classroom, we have a couple of people who tell their stories in these latest panel speakers I have. So two people trained by Ray Castellino told their prematurity birth stories, along with medical doctors and researchers and pediatricians. So it is happening. These stories are riveting for people, and we do need to tell our stories of what we've learned about our births and how we've integrated them into us, and the meaning that they've had, and how we see our perinatal material in our lives and how it works and how we can become more conscious. So I absolutely agree with you, Cliff. I think we need to be telling our story.
Awesome. We'll talk more about how to do that.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, what comes up for me now is maybe even having some like story sharing or story development, little check. I don't know if it's a group, but we can like share stories and share scripts of stories and PowerPoints and so on, just to, however that might look like.
Well, to be continued then. Perhaps we'll have more.
All right.
Okay, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, just turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you head out the door. It's so nice to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Matthew. Bye, Matthew. Hi, Sergio.
Hi,
Hi,
Kate.
everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Marcia.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, Joanne. See you next time. See you next time.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, it's so fun to watch them come and go, isn't it?
It is. I've never stayed for the whole thing. That was cool.
Yeah.